Ladies and gentlemen, AMD have been on a roll of late. There are two products specifically we're going to be discussing in this video, the first being EPYC and the second is the Radeon Instinct MI25, which of course is based upon Vega. These two products are very much taking a piece of the pie from both Intel and Nvidia. My name's Paul, and in this RedGaming.com video, we're going to be going through the final specifications of these products, thanks to, well, releases and demonstrations from AMD themselves. Two small things before we begin. First, apologies for any background noise which seeps into the video. It is very hot here in the UK. Houses in the UK have not embraced lovingly in the throes of passion air conditioning, i.e., translation, we don't have air conditioning in most of our houses yet, therefore summer and the UK do not love each other too well. The second is that I would like to thank, amongst others, Paul, Ryan, Joe, and a couple of others that I'm likely forgetting for sending me parts of this story. So thank you very much to everyone who writes to me at any particular time. You can do so, of course, on Facebook, which is facebook.com/redgamingtech, or you can email me directly, which is paul@redgamingtech. Right, shall we begin? While many of us suspected what the Radeon Instinct MI25 is, it has now been confirmed. It is a Vega-based part, which has a 300 watt TDP, 16 gigabytes of high bandwidth memory too, because of course it does, and of course the obligatory 4096 stream cores. This is thanks to, of course, the next generation compute units, also known as NCU to their friends, buddies and cohorts. This puts the GPU at 12.3 teraflops of performance. This is actually slightly slower than the Radeon Frontier Edition. This is because it's only clocked at 1501 MHz, only of course, and the memory is putting out 484 gigabytes per second of bandwidths. Naturally, because this is the Vega architecture, it also fully supports half precision, and this means you're looking at about 24.6 teraflops, which is pretty darn nice indeed. This means that per watt, you're looking at around 41 G-flops. I just want to say that again, G-flops, not T-flops, G-flops of performance, 41 G-flops performance per watt, and that is F32 peak. Of course, size, no matter what anyone tells you, does matter. This GPU is not exactly tiny either. So it's a 10.5 inch card. However, it is passively cooled. There are a couple of performance-based numbers that one can also take a look at as well. And let's just be honest, until we really get the products out in the wild and people do a lot of testing, I won't go too much into the benchmarks because, of course, they're very geared towards what stuff that AMD feel confident in this particular card to do. There are also numerous other releases, including the MI16 as well as the MI8. These are based on both Polaris and Fiji, respectively, but quite frankly, I'm not going to discuss those in this particular video because I don't think many people, at least in our target demographic of audience, is probably that interested in it. I think most folks are interested in Vega, let's just be honest. Now, let's talk about EPYC, shall we? Also known as Naples. I feel most of you are aware what EPYC actually is. For those who don't know, it is, of course, a set of server-based parts, or rather processor-based parts, which offer up to 32 cores, 64 threads for a single CPU. Quite honestly, there are so many different SKUs, I would be here until Christmas trying to read them all out, but they do go up to the EPYC 67601, which once again has 32 cores, 64 threads. This is a thanks, of course, to SMT, also known as simultaneous multi-threading. In terms of retail availability and pricing, well, how much these cost really depend upon, well, how much you're willing to spend. For example, you could pick yourself up the EPYC 7251, which is going to cost you just a measly, a paltry $475 US. On the other hand, you could pick up the aforementioned 7601, and that's going to cost you $4,200 US. As for availability, you're looking over the next couple of months. So some are available today, some are going to be available end of July. So let's say the next, 6-7 weeks, you're should be able to see plentiful supply of these processors. We've discussed at length the architecture of Ryzen multiple times, so I don't want to go too much into that. I do want to, however, just for a moment focus on some of the shiny stuff, which is specific to EPYC. So first of all, there is what is known as the AMD Secure Processor and Memory Encryption. You might say, well, what the balls is that? And you would be right to use the word balls. It is essentially a 32-bit ARM Cortex-A5 microcontroller. And the basic premise is that it provides cryptographic functionality. And it basically provides secure generation of keys and management. It's not 100% foolproof. For example, with SME, which is Secure Memory Encryption, DMA attacks can still happen and basically circumvent SME, but generally speaking, it is definitely an advantage. It supports hardware devices, network and storage, and in theory, it allows users to be much more confident that their data is simply not going to be stolen by some dude just randomly putting in a USB stick and just being able to hack whatever they want. It also stops malicious use of like administrators who perhaps want to pry into other users' data. Secondly, this leads us into secure encrypted virtualization, which is SEV. Now, this stuff starts to get very complex, especially if you don't have at least a rudimentary understanding of virtual machines. I have actually put out a virtual machine video on the channel before, so you can check that out if you so desire. But basically, a VM is, if you don't know, a operating system which can emulate a different operating system. For example, you could technically have like a Mac OS running on Windows. You could have Linux running under Windows. You could have Linux running Windows. You get the idea. So what happens here is that each hypervisor, each VM, or a VM with multiple containers, has its own key. What the idea behind that is, let's say that you are a malicious user that has a provisioned virtual machine on a server. Let's say you're virtual machine 5, and let's say there's 10 users total. That means, in theory, you have 9 targets available to you. What this basically does is provide a key so that the other 9 are given keys when data is being sent to and from memory. So in other words, that CPU will, quite frankly, basically the system will just reject you trying to call data or access another machine unless you have that specific key for it. There are latency problems with this. I say problems, it's just that you can have 7 to 8 nanoseconds of additional latency if this is enabled. So it's about 1.5% performance hit. If you are, of course, doing things which are not necessarily indicative to data sensitivity, and by golly gosh, this isn't a big deal for you, especially, for example, if you're a user who is running your own internal stuff, like you're doing multiple VMs and perhaps running beta servers or whatever, that's maybe not a big deal. On the other hand, let's say you're Amazon, let's say you're doing AWS or you're Microsoft doing Azure, and obviously users are provisioning all the time, giving them access to this facility and saying, hey, it will be a bit slower, a tiny bit slower, but it's safer. That might help at least some level of reducing data theft. While we have touched upon multiple times Infinity Fabric, I do want to just glaze over it very briefly in this video, because there are a couple of reasons. One, basically EPYC processors use 4 individual silicon dies for each CPU. Now, the reason behind this is that it improves production yields. So obviously, the bigger the processor, the more chance there is that something is going to go whoopsie, not working. So if that happens, you don't want the whole thing to just be completely unusable. This is one of the reasons, of course, binning exists. Therefore, if you can break the processor essentially down into smaller pieces and then connect it later almost like, Lego blocks, the chances of your silicon being usable are much greater. But obviously, just like Lego needs to fit together, this also needs to fit together, and that's where Infinity Fabric come in. You basically have cache coherency, energy efficiency, and also low latency. One distinct advantage that Ryzen has over a lot of Intel offerings is quite simply I/O. Quite frankly, this is ridiculous. You have 8 channels of DDR4 available to you. This means you can have up to 2 terabytes per CPU socket. of memory, which is absolutely just bonkers. The other factor, which perhaps is going to be very interesting, is PCIe bandwidth, because you have up to 128 PCIe lanes. Actually, wait, not up to. See, here's the thing that's actually killing it for AMD and making Intel very, very squirmy. All of AMD's CPUs in EPYC lineup offer this functionality. All offer 8 channels DDR4 and all offer 128 PCIe lanes available, which is definitely a major advantage over Intel, where obviously we all know the story that different product levels, different SKUs offer different amounts of, let's say, PCIe lanes, and it's just, quite frankly, a bit messy. According to AMD, and obviously we'll wait until we see a larger pool of benchmarks, but early reports seem pretty good. A single 32-core EPYC CPU can actually outperform a dual-socket 12-core, 24-thread Intel Xeon machine. One of the reasons behind this is AMD have been pretty aggressive when it comes to the clock speeds for all of the EPYC SKUs. Now, obviously, pricing does come into it, and AMD are definitely pretty decent in terms of pricing, and what you have really is a behemoth. Just think about it. You have 32 cores with SMT, which means 64 logical CPUs, 64 megabytes of level 3 cache. I mean, Jesus, back in the 90s, late 90s actually, 64 megabytes of memory for a PC, like I'm talking main system memory, was a lot. Just think of it this way. The Xbox 360 total memory is 512 megabytes, and that's total memory. Usable memory is about 480, I think, something like that. The PS2 rather, not PS4, has 32 megabytes of main system memory. The Xbox, the original Xbox, has 64 megabytes total. So I just want to put that into some level of perspective. That 64 megabytes of level 3 cache, only level 3, that's not including level 2 or anything like that, that is ludicrous. And obviously the fact it's got 512-bit 8-channel DDR4 memory interface, it basically means that this thing is quite literally monstrous. Now, does that mean that I think Intel is screwed? Well, that's a different topic, and quite frankly, another video in and of itself, because I don't want to make this video any longer than it is, and I do have a series of points I want to make there. But it's not whether Intel is screwed. Like, just let's, for the sake of argument, just for the sake of this video, say that Intel aren't screwed. Let's say that Intel and AMD are roughly on the same footing. That immediately tells you that AMD are going to take up market share. The fact that they have this, and it works so well because of GPU computing with their various MI25 or perhaps the new Frontier Edition, Radeons and all of this stuff, it puts Intel in a very, very, very weird position. Do I think that AMD are going to dominate? I don't necessarily know if they're going to dominate. I did mention this in another video. One of the issues AMD are going to have is that a lot of companies are comfortable with Intel. Now let's be very silly here. Let's say Intel were 25% more expensive, 25% slower than AMD, then there's a good chance that a lot of companies would jump ship. But if they're roughly competitive, perhaps a little bit faster, something like that, we're talking for different product segments, because obviously different CPUs, different applications running are going to, perform differently and all that stuff. The issue is a lot of folks don't want to just jump to a completely new architecture, and that's why legacy is a thing, because let's say you're a company like, I don't know, let's say you're a big company like Amazon, you could definitely offer AMD-based products and Intel-based products, but if you're not, if you're in that mid-range and you're, let's say, provisioning service for your own business, perhaps you want to host things internally, then what has to happen, of course, is that you need to make sure that reliability is a thing. Now, that's not to say that AMD CPUs are not reliable. I'm not even slightly suggesting that. But there may be bugs in them. There might be BIOS updates that are required. There might be incompatibility with certain memory. It might just simply gosh darn not like a certain version of Windows or operating system and various other bits and pieces. And I can tell you one thing that IT professionals bloody hate is needing to bug fix a server rack when they have another 3,522 server racks to also bug fix. It's a pain in the ass. And, generally speaking, these companies' time is money. So if they have to cough up a little bit more money for an Intel solution, it's possible they may just decide to do that and wait perhaps for the next generation of EPYC CPUs, or maybe wait, just grab Intel for now, and then when they need further CPUs, they'll go to AMD. But either way, this is great for AMD. Why? And one of the reasons I find this interesting, from the perspective of mostly a power user / gamer, is because ultimately, this is money, right? Don't think of EPYC, just replace the EPYC logo and just put dollar signs on each of where the letters are, and that's what basically this is for AMD, because yes, gamers, of course, constantly need new power. Like, we need new GPUs, we need new CPUs. But first of all, we're not going to buy more than one CPU. Realistically, the average user is not going to buy more than one CPU every couple of years. Maybe if you're fairly affluent, you might buy a couple. Same for a GPU, but most people keep their stuff for quite a while. Even if you are very affluent, let's say you buy a GPU, the latest GPU every year, that's only one. Companies like Dell, Amazon, you get the idea. They will buy multiple batches of these things. They will buy so many of them, it's ludicrous, because they need them. They're going to buy server racks upon server racks upon server racks. And it's not just because they're replacing old, outdated hardware. It's because they need more, because obviously we're moving towards deep learning, artificial intelligence. Even people who are making websites, YouTube. I think how many videos are on YouTube alone, the data that's being put on YouTube, Google searches, God knows what. And of course, a lot of mobile devices now are still quite light. What I mean by that is that they don't really do many calculations locally. So, for example, a lot of apps are basically just the front end, and the back end is being held by the server. Therefore, it's going to be a very, very, very profitable thing for AMD, of course, to jump on this and to constantly make new CPUs and then to sell those out. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.